I'm going to be the main person in this game. And when it comes to working, especially with the neurodiverse community and other games, is understanding that authority is as much about compassion and empathy and understanding as it is about accountability and running the game. Too many people think, oh, I'm the person in charge. People have to bend to me. But a good authority member, especially at the table, knows when to give in, compromise, and know when to back down.
And welcome back to the Money, the Mindset, and the Mentoring podcast. Today we have Thomas Wilson of R&H Creative Advocacy and Storytelling. Dude, I know this is going to be a dicey conversation. And do you know why I say that? Because we're talking tabletop, brother. I'm excited. Thank you for coming to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Well, you take such an interesting spin on the whole tabletop world. I mean, with my kids, we play a lot of board games. And with my friends, I'll play a lot of board games. I'm a geek when it comes to escape rooms. I just love the whole gaming environment. I love jujitsu because really it's just a physical game. It's really just a game of chess with people. And so the idea of taking that and using storytelling as a way to really bring out the best in people who might be having some challenges in communicating. So I want to learn a little bit more about what you do and how people can learn to maybe impact that, you put that impact into their lives and with their community. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's talk a little bit about storytelling as a whole. And, first of all, how did you discover that storytelling would be something really impactful in changing people's lives in your advocacy work?
Well, I would have to say for a lot of people, I found my voice in storytelling. Storytelling it's existed as long as human beings have been around because it helps us to connect, emphasize, and understand our world. But for so many of us, it is also how we find our own voice, our own power, and really how we want to live our lives.
Absolutely. For me, podcasting is my version of storytelling because I get that moment to be able to have good communication with people and then share those stories with others. Was there a moment in your creative advocacy through storytelling that was the most impactful to you?
There are so many of those. One of the reasons I love my work is it is a constant series of joy. It's hard. But something I will say happened really recently. I was telling a story in a local day program near my area. I had gone to do D&D, and I showed up. They heard that I was doing D&D. Everybody flocked to my table. It was a wonderful game. I had my diehard fans, my new people, my people falling asleep. And then right after that, the person who ran the program, she grabbed my hand with both of her hands and said, "That was amazing. They were mesmerized by you." And I kind of just, in my own nervousness and anxiety, kind of stood there for a second like this, then smiled, and she was just so happy. It's such a beautiful connection to humanity.
Absolutely. I have some of my fondest memories with my oldest stepbrother, or half brother rather. His name's Trevor. Goes by Jacob Moon. He's a musician now. And what he used to do when we were kids is he would come over after my parents had separated. He would come over to the house and he would play D&D with us till the wee hours of the morning. And the amount of saves I did against poison or rolling the D12 to hopefully get the nat 20, those are the things that really go back in my memory as just such fun things. And so Dungeons and Dragons to me has such a really, really warm spot in my heart. Now, what made you get that connection to use tabletop role-playing games such as D&D to promote the importance of neurodiversity?
So the simple answer is I always like to joke that if you are neurodiverse, you're probably going to be drawn to D&D in general, especially if you have autism. The game itself is this beautiful ability to imagine and inspire and create these vivid, rich stories. But on top of that, and I'm sure the game has been designed and adapted by people in the neurodiverse community over the years, But what it isn't always made for is people for the community. There are a lot of really complex rules. I started doing this work when I realized that it teaches math, it teaches problem solving, it teaches mindfulness and public speaking. And so I started with a group of adults of over 10 years ago now. It had been a massive success, and ever since then, it's just grown, and my skill set has helped those skills to become even more available through the game.
You know, in the game, I think is one of those most beautiful games that you can make it as complicated as you want or as simple as you want, because it has so much flexibility in it. And when you mention about the idea of there's so many people with autism who are drawn to it, it brings me back to the similarities between Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and D&D, because it can be as complicated as you want or as simple as you want. And there's a guy who's named Craig Jones, one of the better players in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and he says there's two things to be successful in Jiu-Jitsu, to be the top in the world. The first thing you need is steroids, and the second thing you need is autism. And you have both of those, you're going to win every match. So now, why do you think games such as the tabletop role-playing games, why do you think they're so impactful to foster an inclusive storytelling experience?
I think that's something a lot of people don't think about, but one of the key aspects is imagination is essential to human life. A lot of us are taught at a young age that we have to give up our imagination. We have to grow up and not play games and not do these things. But there's this really beautiful aspect about children, which is they want to play. They know it's important. They know it's vital to their existence and their expression. But in that, like these games like tabletop role-playing games, Dungeons & Dragons, whatever system you're using, the great thing about it is it draws people in because it's one, collaborative, it helps people connect to the people around them, but it's also this really beautiful expression of childlike joy and imagination, escapism, and really just what it is to be free and be in another world in a safe and fun environment for just a little bit.
Well, the one thing that I think that makes it safe, in my opinion, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this one, is the world that's being created is being created really inherently by them. Whereas it's very different than when you go into an experience such as like a video game. Because a video game, the manufactured visual and or auditorial experience is really crafted by somebody else in its full completion. Whereas in a board game environment, such as a tabletop game or something like D&D, you as the listener are really the owner of that crafting of that space. Your vision of the characters might be very different than the vision of the characters of the person beside you.
I absolutely agree, and I think you touched on this to a degree. The great thing about D&D is it is an ownership of the story. I myself have seen many people start from beginning role players to experienced role players. They still get to own that story. It is a collaborative, shared storytelling element. And for a lot of people, they also get to set the tone of the table. They get to have a character that is theirs that they get to live through. But the other element that is definitely safe within that is that a healthy D&D table is going to be positive. There are going to be people actively having fun together. And I would say a good game master really emphasizes that there's not going to be bigotry or sexism or anger or hostility at the table, and was really easily able to make sure those rules exist consistently.
Yeah, and so if we just look at that for a moment, what are some of the things that that person who's in charge of the game, as we know, it's a GM for D&D, what are some of the things that they can do to really hit the idea of making it hit the target for neurodiversity?
So I would say there are two main things. The first one is the use of authority at the table. The second one I really feel like is the understanding of how to talk to people. When you're a game master, you have to come up with NPCs, you have to come up with plot elements, you have to come up with a story and a world. But when you're really good at working with the neurodiverse community, it's really easy to understand that so many people who play this game are seeking communication and connection. And knowing how to hold a powerful, unique conversation is really, really important. And as an authority, something else that you can do is making sure that you're using your energy, your enthusiasm, and your knowledge in the best way to represent yourself in that game through those story elements.
I like the idea that we first started with authority. Is that what you're first going to do is you're going to implement an element of authority. What does that look like? What's your interpretation of how authority could express itself?
Actually, would you be willing to say that one more time? There is a plane going by, and it is obnoxiously loud. I am so sorry.
No, that's no problem at all. When we look at your opinion on authority, which I think is an interesting statement to make, it can have so many different connotations. I think it's got a very powerful one. And I want to understand a little bit more about when you're expressing authority in this atmosphere, what does that look like? How does that express?
So I think it's different to each game master, but what I mean by authority, and this is something I think a lot of game masters need to know, is how to carry authority with accountability and responsibility. I've worked with game masters. I've helped younger youth learn how to be game master. A key experience that a lot of those people think is, I'm going to tell everything. I'm going to be the main person in this game. And when it comes to working, especially with the neurodiverse community and other games, is understanding that authority is as much about compassion and empathy and understanding as it is about accountability and running the game. Too many people think, oh, I'm the person in charge. People have to bend to me. But a good authority member, especially at the table, knows when to give in, compromise, and know when to back down.
So a game master and a podcast host are actually very similar in the sense that when somebody comes into your podcast, it's your house, it's your rules. But the way that you express those rules and the way that you're compassionate to the person who's the guest and the way that you really develop content through the experience of the guest, that's very similar to running as a game master who's really working to support people who are neurodiverse.
I absolutely agree. I would also add to that, most likely similarly, both podcasters and game masters, they are not just telling the story for themselves, not just for the story itself. Podcasters are communicating to an audience that is seeking some form of knowledge, and being able to use that knowledge well and effectively, I'm sure correlates very well between the two of them.
And if you're going to give three key things in a very short order, what would those three key things if you're really looking to communicate with somebody who is neurodiverse? What would be a top three?
So the top three I would give to someone who is neurodiverse. The first one, no one is going to perseverate as much about that mistake that you made or you think you made as much as you are going to. Like, I spend a lot of my life going, did I say this? Did I say this right? Is this email mean? Or was I too harsh? That kind of thing. I'll go through that hundreds of times in a day. The second thing that I would say is your neurodiversity, I'm sure, gives you a very unique spark in a world that needs that light. And the third thing that I would really emphasize is you don't always need to give in. A lot of people are told, you have this, so I need you to do this. Or you have this, so, you don't always understand what I mean. That's not okay. We need to understand that people, no matter their age with neurodiversity, are allowed to have autonomy, agency, and allowed to be able to explore the treatments that they want the way they want, as long as it is healthy and encouraging for their life.
I think that's beautiful. And I think it's interesting because to me, when I look at, people say, is that person on the spectrum? I'm like, well, it's a spectrum. Everybody's on the spectrum. Sometimes it's 0, sometimes it's 100%. And what you're telling me and the way that you've presented those three items, that's actually for pretty much if you want to have a conversation with anybody. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter whether they're identifying as a specific neurodiversity element or whether they're not identifying with anything. I think that's good principles just for really good communication.
Thank you. I like to think so. The other thing I would say, just because I love that comment about everybody being on the spectrum, So many traits of autism are actually deeply inherent just in humanity at this point, like seeking silence, quiet spaces, things like that. But I do want to emphasize there is a difference between thinking you have autism because of that and actually knowing.
Yeah.
People with autism live with some very significant struggles, especially if they are, I shouldn't say struggles, difficulties, especially if they have a coexisting diagnosis.
Mm.
And I am a big believer in the importance of self-diagnosis. But again, it comes back to accountability. Thinking you have something does not always equate to that. But self-diagnosis can also help you get that treatment and that confirmation.
Yeah, I think if you have an issue and you need to diagnose it, you can certainly spend some time with yourself, being the YouTube doctor, and look at yourself, but getting that, you know, treatment from a specialist, somebody who you can really go and rely on, I think is extremely important to know with what you're working with. I mean, it's just like when I blew out my knee, if I didn't go see a surgeon, if I didn't go see a knee specialist, I wouldn't known that I tore my meniscus. I just thought my knee hurts. And then being able to convert my knee hurts into, well, I got to go get surgery and actually solve it, I wouldn't be able to be competing in jiu-jitsu today.
Mm-hmm. And I would also add to that, there is, just like with anything, searching on YouTube or online, there are things that are dangerous and we have to be careful. And that being said, seeking the pursuit of getting diagnosed, it's difficult. There are doctors who don't always want to help you. There are some that are going to jump to medications. And that's why it's so important when you're getting that treatment to understand your own autonomy, but also understand that your treatment should best suit you on the basis of making sure that you are living your best life. And I don't mean any disrespect to doctors in general, but there is a lot of overgeneralization in healthcare, especially as things are moving further into this new mentality of mental health and other things.
Absolutely. But when we look at the migration to a real focus on diversity or inclusion, one of the things that I think has been really, really positive in that whole movement is talking about the rise of the ADA compliance. We've seen this a lot with access, and this is really about accessibility, guys. But the idea is that when we look at the compliance, it's always been about the physical space. Is the doorway wide enough? Is the ramp got a safe slope? Is the bathroom be able to open and close the doors? Those sort of things in the physical space. But the really big migration we're seeing right now in the ADA movement is around compliance and the regulations, specifically around digital platforms. How important do you think is to ensure that creative content like storytelling in a digital space is accessible for everyone?
I'm not even going to sugarcoat it. It's a necessity. Especially if you're doing the work that I do or are seeking to help people, even if you're just running a regular website. On a business sense, you're not going to be able to keep people if they feel overwhelmed or stressed or they can't access what you do. But more importantly, on a human level, it is a genuine right to have access to the resources we need. And part of that is also a genuine right to have what will make our lives better. And I do agree, it's rapidly changing, but as a society globally, we need to get better at acknowledging that the underserved communities out there are underserved because so many people easily forget about them.
Absolutely, I agree with that. And I think with this push for regulatory compliance, I mean, some of the fines are really stiff if you're not compliant. And for people, they really need to go out and research what they need to do to make sure that they have the accessibility compliance on their website. Not only just for the fact of, to avoid stiff penalties, but for the idea that, you're going to serve an audience that if you serve them well, they're going to be really loyal. And that's going to be a great audience that's going to back you up, and that's going to always keep them coming back for more.
And I wholeheartedly agree. One of the great strengths of my work as a sensory-friendly storyteller is providing not just a service, not just a realm of storytelling that makes the world a little bit better, but by emphasizing that if I acknowledge the people I work with and their needs, especially what they tell me they need, by doing that, I'm opening up a vein of opportunities, not just business for myself, but opportunities for people around the world to go to events, to access their community better, and to ultimately, through a variety of different means, gain access to accessibility needs and communication skills that they might not have gotten normally.
That's beautiful. And the other one, that when we pivot a little bit on the idea of some of the stuff that you're really working on right now, I know you're putting a lot of effort into the Employment First initiative. And what this is really designed around is pushing real jobs at real fair wages for individuals who have disabilities. What do you see as creative storytelling aligning with that push for inclusive employment?
So I had touched on this briefly, and it's something a lot of people don't think about, which is storytelling is actively practiced in the workplace every day. To some degree, expressing our needs is a form of storytelling. It is communication. It is also something that can help people know what they need to access. It's a way of also talking amongst employees to find out what experiences are like. But specifically when it comes to job seeking, um, in its most basic form, when we are sitting in front of an avenue, we need to make sure our employers know what we need in terms of accommodations and other things. But it also, the overall interview in and of itself is a storytelling exercise about how effectively we can represent ourselves and what that employer needs.
In sales, what we do a lot of times is role play. So we go through in a very safe environment, test out different mechanisms for communication, and ensure that that is productive in the real live space. When we look at storytelling in helping people who are neurodiverse start to really prepare for meaningful employment, how do you see that connectivity to things like, as you talk about with the job interview, or even just interfacing with another employee? How do you see that creating a better and more inclusive setting?
For starters, it is so much around making sure the workplace is equitable. Um, there are so many strengths around the workplace currently, but unfortunately, a large chunk of people with a diagnosis or lived experience of any kind are not employed. And I truly believe by helping people better tell their own stories, better express their needs through examples of why they need it, as well as helping workplaces to understand that communication is not black and white, and that their workplaces may not work, and that the best way to represent that is to give examples. I really do believe that there will be an evolution and change that may be very slow, as many evolutionary changes are in society. But ultimately, the more we can get people into the workplace on a basis that allows them to thrive, the better.
Now, what role do you think the Employment First framework plays in shifting this perception and providing availability for people in the workplace?
So I'm a big believer that the employment first movement has existed and is existing out of necessity. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head. I think it's something like 40%, but don't quote me on that. I don't have the number in front of me. I will say there is a massive amount of people not in work, but through this movement, through this focus on equitable work, through this focus on accommodations and refocusing the workplace, that number is changing. And there are so many stories in particular that emphasize when someone is set up in the right workplace in a way that actually works for them and works for their lived experience, those people can thrive. And counterintuitively to what a lot of people think, there are the neurodiverse, the mental health, the many other underserved communities are heavily skilled workers who can do the work better than many people think. And the mentality that those people are not going to be good at the job is a deeply inhibiting mindset.
I totally agree with that. I think the idea, what you really hit the nail on the head is, it's not we're looking to hire people who are not going to perform.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking to hire people who are going to perform, but you might overlook because of the idea of maybe your perspective
Mm-hmm.
on how that neurodiversity presents itself.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely. The other thing that a lot of people also don't realize, I think today in the world, the mindset is people don't want to work. They don't want to do the job. They don't want to earn money. And that mindset is really ultimately a place of privilege, especially if you already have a job. It is so easy to be like, oh, people don't want to do what I do. But the reality is there are many workplaces out there that are not willing to hire people or are scared to hire people, or just straight out like don't even want to hire within the community because of biases. But one of the things that really helps to counter that is just a genuine curiosity of how to do things better. Curiosity, it can be dangerous, but it can also be deeply helpful and help establish genuine change.
Can you share an example of where you saw somebody's perspective change on somebody who has a neurodiversity shift, and maybe how that happened through storytelling or some mentorship or something where a program helped them?
Yeah, definitely. I can actually pull from my own experience, my day job that I do outside of my business that I've been with for almost 11 years now. When I got hired with them, I was one of the first people ever hired with this healthcare agency. Over the years, I've had my own difficulties. I've had my own struggles with my own neurodiversity, my own daily mindsets that need to be changed. And I will say with my job, partly because I'm so close to the boss, partly also because I do an excellent job as a mentor, they have been willing to adjust and accommodate several times. And that foundation in that job is ultimately what gave me many of the skills I have now, but it also has allowed me to help my community and also establish a degree of independence that I would not have had.
That's amazing. And kudos to the employment environment that you're in for creating such a wonderful space for you to be able to build, develop, and really support the people around you. I think that's an amazing environment. And I wish the world had more environments like that. That's awesome. That's awesome. And so to close off, what are some of the things that maybe I didn't ask that maybe I should have asked around the concept either of storytelling, neurodiversity, or any of the programs that we might have discussed?
So we had such a great conversation. There are just two things. One, the first question is, how can I do a better job? I always love that question because it has that curiosity. And even if it's not asked of me, it's such an important question. And then the other thing that I also love people to ask is, how do I get started? Those two questions are really, in my mind, the foundation of getting better. If we know where to grow, if we know how to thrive, we know how to better serve communities, we can start putting in the work. And those questions and those first few footprints in the sand are really what are going to make a lot of changes in a lot of ways.
Well, I love those two questions. Is number one is what can I do better? And I think there's a huge laundry list in everything that we do. I always say when you're evaluating your success of the day, do you want to give you? I'm going to give you a hint on how to win every day. Do you want to hear this?
Sure.
This is the way I always tell people how to win every day. So if you want to win every day, have a piece of paper with two columns. On the left-hand side, it's a column saying, here's my goals for the day, and here's all the tactics of what I'm going to get done. Here's all the things. And on the left-hand side, it's an empty space that says personal development up at the top. And then at the end of the day, you go through and you're going to mark all of your wins. Mm-hmm. And so if you finished a task, it gets a check mark. If you hit a goal, it gets a check mark. All the ones that got an X on the left column now move over to the right column. And these I consider wins because now you're putting into your personal development column the things that you want to work on. And so as it goes into that column, now that I consider that as win because you've just identified something that you need to fix. That's an amazing win. Mm-hmm. And that's as a way that I think anybody can win every single day.
Absolutely.
So when we look at somebody on how to, what's the next steps? Like what would they do to really get into it? What does that look like?
So I always like to say the next steps. One, make sure you're informed. Actively seek education. Does not need to be in college. It does not need to be necessarily a formal training. That can be a conversation. That can be listening to a really good YouTuber. That can be reading a book. And then the thing right after that, check your ego at the door. The ego can be really helpful. It can make sure we do our work well. But when we start to put our ego and our own personal interests over other people, that's when the work starts to fail. And the last thing I would say, once you do that, take a deep breath, focus, and just go, where can I start? Start knocking on doors, start talking to people. If you don't have as much knowledge as you feel like, that's another great way to expand and grow what you can do.
Well, and I think I'm going to trump up your ego for a moment. And I'm going to say the best thing that they can do is actually reach out to you, check out some of the blogs, check out some of the things that you're doing on social media, and just get checked into somebody who's really involved in the space. And that's going to the RH Creativity, Advocacy, and Storytelling .net. We'll put the link in the show notes so people can come check it out. And find you on LinkedIn as well. I know you're on LinkedIn as well. And I think, listening to this conversation is one of the things that just makes me so excited for a lot of the changes that are happening in creating really, really good, inclusive environments for people who have been struggling with a lot of neurodiverse issues and the way that they can connect with information, both physically in a space like in a boardroom cafe or a board game cafe, or online on a podcast or anything on a website. So I love your focus, Thomas. It's something that's very near and dear and personal to me, and it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure being on it.
Thank you. And guys, this is the money. This is the mindset. This is the mentoring podcast. We'll see you on the next one.